Good day, ma'am. Good day, buddies. We're the Group 1B Scream 1B. Jean Lloyd Idanyol, Joros Tarayo, Maybelline Harapuhop, Yazi Kalimiton, and me, Physician C. Viva. And we are here to present to you all about the Japanese occupation in the Philippines. So let's proceed. And for the short background of Japanese occupation in the Philippines, it will be presented by Miss Maybelline Harapuhop. Maybelline.
On December 8, 1941, Japan invaded the Philippines. Clark Air Base in Pampanga was first attacked, and also Nicos Field outside Manila was attacked. Then, on December 22, the Japanese forces landed at the Lingayen Gulf and continued on to Manila. General Douglas MacArthur declared Manila an open city on advice of Commonwealth President Manuel L. Quezon to avoid its destruction. Manila was occupied by the Japanese on January 2, 1942. MacArthur retreated with his troops off Bataan, while the Commonwealth government withdrew to Corregidor Island before proceeding to the United States. The joint American and Filipino soldiers in Bataan finally surrendered on April 9, 1942. MacArthur escaped to Corregidor, then proceeded to Australia. The 76,000 captured soldiers were forced to embark on the infamous Death of March to a prison camp more than 100 kilometers north. An estimated 10,000 prisoners died due to thirst, hunger, and exhaustion.
For the next is the establishment of the Hukbo ng Bayan laban sa mga Hapon, or also known as Hukbalahap, established in February 1942. The establishment of Hukbo ng Bayan laban sa mga Hapon in the Philippines, or also known as Hukbalahap. In the midst of fear and chaos, some farmers of Pampanga banded together and created local brigades for the protection. Luis Taruc, together with Juan Filio and Castro Alejandrino and other leaders of organized farmers, held a meeting in February 1942 in Cabiao, Nueva Ecija. In that meeting, they agreed to fight the Japanese as a unified guerrilla army. Another meeting was held the following month, wherein representatives from Tarlac, Pampanga, and Nueva Ecija threshed out various details regarding the organizations, which they agreed to call Hukbo ng Bayan laban sa mga Hapon, or Hukbalahap. And the appointed leader of this organized institution is Luis Taruc, together with his right-hand man, Alejandrino. The members were simply known as Hooks. So, way back ago, in the Japanese era, we all know that the Japanese invaders are so very abusive to Filipino people, especially to the Filipino farmers. So, the farmers decided to organize and establish an institution which served the purpose to protect their lives against the abusive and harsh colonization of the Japanese people in our country. So they call the institution Hukbo ng Bayan laban sa mga Hapon, or also known as Hukbalahap. And the appointed leader of this institution is Luis Taruc, together with his right-hand man Alejandrino. And for the next is all about the Philippine Executive Commission, established in January 23, 1942. And it will be presented by Miss Yazi Galimiton. Yazi.
The Philippine Executive Commission, in accordance with the instructions of President Manuel Quezon to Jorge Vargas. The Filipino officials in Manila were told to enter into agreement and compromises with the Japanese to mitigate the suffering of the people under the ironclad rule of the Japanese. On January 23, 1942, the Philippine Executive Commission was established with Vargas as chairman. The following was appointed heads: Benigno Aquino Sr., Interior Antonio de las Finance Jose P. Laurel, Justice Claro M. Recto, Education, Health, and Public Welfare, and Quinto Paredes, Public Worker and Communication. Jose Yolo was named Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The following month, an election was held for members of the Preparatory Commission for Philippines Independence, or PCPI. The purpose of the PCPI is to draw up the Constitution for a free Philippines. Jose Laurel became its head against the will of the PCPI delegates. The new constitution was finalized on July 10, 1943. 2 months later, it was ratified by the Kalibapi, which was the only political party allowed it to exist at the time. Of Kalibapi is the acronym for Kapisanan sa Palilingkod sa Bagong Pilipinas. The new constitution, which noticeably lacked Bill of Rights, contained 12 articles lifted from the 1935 constitution that fitted the wishes of the Japanese. It was meant to be in effect only temporarily while the Philippines still in chaos. After the war, a new constitution will again be drafted for the Philippines Republic.
And for the next is all about the Second Republic, established in September 20, 1943, and it will be presented by Miss Jean Lloyd Idanyol. Jean Lloyd.
On September 20, 1943, the Kalibapi, under the leadership of its Director General Benigno Aquino Sr., held a party convention to elect 54 members of the National Assembly. The assembly was actually made up of 108 members, but half of its number was composed of incumbent governors and city mayors. So it only means that the Kalibapi, under the Director General Benigno Aquino Sr., held a convention party to elect 54 members. Then the 54 members of the National Assembly. Then the assembly was actually made up of 108 members. So out of 108 members, almost half of the population was composed of the incumbent governors or city mayors. So let us say that out of 108, there are 54 members of it that was incumbent governors and the city mayors. Then they chooses 54 members to be part of the National Assembly. Then Jose P. Laurel was elected as President of the Second Republic. The First Republic was Aguinaldo's Malolos Republic, and both Benigno Aquino Sr. and Ramon Avancina as a Vice President. So, in the elected President for the Second Republic was Jose P. Laurel, and there were 2 Vice Presidents that was been elected, that is Benigno Aquino Sr. and Ramon Avancina. So, during the Second Republic, there was 2 Vice President and 1 President, and the rest are the parts of the officer. Then, in the First Republic, it was Aguinaldo Malolos Republic. So, it was Aguinaldo who was been the President of the First Republic. Then, the new Republic was inaugurated on October 14, 1943, on the front step of the Legislative Building in Manila. The Philippine flag was hosted as the national anthem was played. So in the Second Republic, our Philippine flag was being raised while singing the national anthem, which is Dilo Panghinigrang. Then it happened on October 14, 1943 at the same year, then in front of the Legislative Building in Manila. Meanwhile, the Japanese started using propaganda to gain the trust and confidence of the Filipino who refused to cooperate with them. So during this time, the Japanese uses propaganda. The purpose of it is to gain the trust and confidence of the Filipino, most especially those Filipino who doesn't agree with the way they live the country. Then they hung giant poster and distribute their materials that contain such slogans that the Philippines belong to the Filipinos. So it is where it started that the Japanese started to hang a poster, giant poster, with the slogan state that the Philippines belong to the Filipinos. So not only poster, but they they uses newspapers, movies, and others to publicize the same idea. So it is not only they didn't only use the poster with the slogans, but also the newspaper. They put it on the newspapers, which is the Philippine or the people tend to read to know the news or to have the idea. Then movies in which there are some who watch this movie, most especially they wanted to know what happening in our society than others. So with the same idea to win the trust and confidence of the Filipino, it is where they wanted to have, or they wanted to get the trust of the Filipinos. Then they promoting Japanese propaganda was one of the main objective of Kalibapi, but still Japanese failed to gain the trust of the Filipinos. So in the Kalibapi, the main objectives or the main agenda of the Japanese was to promote the Japanese propaganda, or was to promote the Japanese. So but then they failed to gain the trust of the Filipinos. So hindi nila natuloy ang plano nila para makuha ang to gain the trust of the Filipinos, since there were most of the Filipinos stand with their own decision, or let's say that Filipinos have paninindigan. So if they say that, they always mean it.
For the next is when General MacArthur returns in October 20, 1944, and it will be presented by Mr. Joros Tarayo. Joros?
The Second Republic. General Douglas MacArthur returns. On October 20, 1944, a few hours after his troops landed, MacArthur waded shore onto the Philippines island of Leyte. That day, he made the radio broadcast in which he declared, "People of the Philippines, I have returned." In January 1945, his forces invaded the main Philippine island of Luzon. From Australia, Allied forces slowly advanced toward the Philippines, bombing several Japanese strongholds until they regained control of areas previously occupied by the enemy. The bombings began on September 21, 1944, and barely a month later, on October 20, 1944, the Americans landed triumphantly in Leyte. Once ashore, General Douglas MacArthur said, "I have returned." Sergio Osmeña was part of MacArthur's group. He had taken over Manuel L. Quezon as president after the latter passed away at Saranac Lake, New York on August 1944. From October 23 to October 26, 1944, the Americans engaged Japanese forces in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, considered as the biggest naval battle in the world history. This historic encounter almost destroyed the entire Japanese fleet and rendered it incapable of further attack. The U.S. victory in the Battle of Leyte Gulf is said to have signaled the beginning of Philippine liberation from the Japanese. By mid-December, The American soldiers had reached Mindoro. The Japanese, meanwhile, secured other area where they thought other American units would land. Nevertheless, US liberation forces successfully docked at Lingayen Gulf on January 9, 1945. The news alarmed the Japanese. Lieutenant General Tomoyoki Yamashita, Supreme Commander of the Japanese troops in Manila, mobilizes kamikazes, Japanese suicide pilots, but they failed to stop Americans. The Japanese also deployed Makapili units to defend Manila, but neither succeeds. On December 8, 1944, President Laurel and his cabinet moved to Baguio upon orders of Yamashita, also known as the Tiger of Malaya. The Japanese forces retreated to Yamashita line, a jungle battlefront stretching along the Sierra Madre Mountains from Antipolo Rizal to Apari, Cagayan. The Japanese in Manila would not give up easily. In fact, it took 3 weeks of intense fighting before they finally surrendered. On February 23, General MacArthur continued to liberate other parts of the country and finally proclaimed general freedom from the Japanese on July 4, 1945, continued to Philippine independence from the Americans.
So in summary, this is the timeline history of the Japanese colonization in the Philippines. So first is the Japanese colonization take place in December 8, 1941. It was the time when Japanese invaded our country. So second is the establishment of the Hukbalahap, take place in February 1942. It was the Revolutionary Army of the Philippines against the Japanese invaders. And thirdly, the Philippine Executive Commission or PEC, take place in January 23, 1942. The Philippine Executive Commission or PEC was established on January 1942 with George B. Vargas as its first chairman. The PEC or the Philippine Executive Commission was created as temporary caretaker government of the Greater Manila area and eventually of the whole Philippines during the Japanese occupation in the country during the World War II. Fourthly is the Second Republic, take place in September 20, 1943. It was the Japanese whom established the Kapisanan ng Paglilingkod sa Bagong Pilipinas or popularly known as Kalibapi as the sole legal political organization, formed the Preparatory Committee on Philippine Independence and drafted a Philippines Constitution. And for the fifth, the return of General Douglas MacArthur to the Philippines, take place on October 20, 1944. The return of General Douglas MacArthur to help the Philippines set free against the Japanese invaders. And lastly, the end of Japanese colonization, take place on July 4, 1945. It was the end of Japanese regime in the Philippines. So once again, that's all, and thank you.